sa inyong lahat. Could you hear me? Very good. I know I'm bringing my smartphone, not because I have my notes here, because I want to stop a few minutes before the maximum time allotted to me. I think, first of all, I must thank you, above all, His Eminence, Luis Antonio Tagle, the Archbishop of Manila, for this invitation to share with you some reflections on the role of the church, of the evangelizing mission of the church in the community of nations. The only worry I had while I was thinking, of course I was very pleased to have been able to accept this invitation, but my big worry was how to keep you awake in such a boring topic. So I don't mind if you sleep after I couldn't see you from here. That's why I'm not wearing my glasses. But just don't snore. Don't disturb your neighbors. First, for us, disciples of Christ, for us, faith communities, parishes, dioceses, there is no greater mission, and there shouldn't be any greater joy than to be able to fulfill and to share in the fulfillment of the risen Lord's mission given to His apostles and disciples, and that is, go out to the world and preach the good news to all creation. Go out to the world and preach the good news to all peoples, to all nations. Many times when we do our ministry, when we try to be enthusiastic evangelizers, many times we pause and think, ang hirap magiging misyonaryo. Ang hirap magiging katekista, wala na nakikinig. Hindi gaya noon, nung bata pa kami, talagang takot kami sa mga katekista. Talagang talagang minimorize yung lahat ng mga prayers kasi binibigyan din ng rosary, binibigyan ng novena to our Mother Perpetual Help. So, iniisip ko lang ngayon, I was a boy, a small boy, 50 years ago. I won't reveal exactly my age, but that's how old I am. Talagang, we were so attentive. Kasi wala pang cellphone, wala pang TV noon sa mga villages, radyo lang. Saka ang radyo hindi laging inoon kasi yung baterya hindi rin masyadong mahal. Ngayon, mga katekista natin, ang daming rivals. Smartphone, ano pa yung lahat ng mga toys, gadgets, etc. So talagang masasabi natin, ang hirap na pala magiging katekista ngayon. Ang hirap pala magiging evangelizer ngayon. Marami ka ng kompetensya. Para sa mabuhay ng karamihang mga tao, ang Panginoon ay hindi na ganun ka-importante. God is not anymore the center of so many people's lives. But even though the work of evangelization is not easy today, we must also ask, has it ever been easy? Was it easy when Jesus Christ, while preaching, people listened to Him for a while, and then when His teachings became hard, like the Eucharist, they abandoned Him? Was it easy when Jesus was preaching in the temple and the high priests and the Sadducees and all the other leaders of societies at the time were completely against Him? Was it easy during the time of our martyrs here? Was it easy during the time of Lorenzo Ruiz in Japan? Their heads were cut. They were put into a pit upside down, and their nails were removed. Was it easy when Pedro Calungsod was a young evangelizer, missionary, catechist in a land which was not his native land? So mga kapatid, sabihin natin, probably it wasn't really easy. The first Christians were burned at the stakes. First Christians were crucified like our Lord. And across centuries, there have been persecutions, even at the level of states, and there were religious wars, etc. Yes, there were tremendous times, very difficult times, very challenging times, very dangerous times, deadly times. But there were also seasons of spring, of sowing, of abundant harvest, and of heroic acts of witnessing, which has always been the best means of evangelization. Let us remember what Tertullian said in the 2nd century, that the blood of our martyrs are the seeds of new Christians. And lately, missionaries are again burned at the stake. Not only missionaries, but faithful throughout the world. Di ba sabi ng Santo Papa natin, yes, during the first centuries of Christianity, the Christians were persecuted. But there has never been a time in the history of Christianity, the 2,000 years, that so much and so many of Christians are being persecuted, are being discriminated against because of their faith. That time is now. It is the time also of persecutions. So sabihin natin, it's not only, however, these physical persecutions against the faithful, but also other kinds of challenges that face evangelization today. That makes the work of evangelization even more challenging. Times have changed. Lagi natin narinig yan. Cultures have changed right before our eyes. Social behavior has changed. Even our families have changed. How many families, especially in the big cities, still pray together in the evening? How many families seem to have forgotten what I said yesterday, the exhortation of Father Peyton, that families that pray together stays together. I just hope that here in the Philippines, we will never forget that. And that's why you are here. The church has called you to reflect together on these challenges and to roll up our sleeves and plunge ourselves once again as enthusiastic evangelizers. If the world has changed, then we must know how it has changed. If the world has changed, then we must find new solutions to new problems, new responses to new challenges. And that's why we ask even ourselves, how do we characterize our world today? How do we characterize our religious situation today? I'm sure that many of the conferences the other day, yesterday, and today speak of the elements that characterize the situation of our world today and of our church, so that we could give an appropriate response to the challenge. You know very well Evangelii Gaudium. I'm sure evidence has exhorted you, I hope not forced you, to read the apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. If you enjoy reading, it's even more enjoyable. If you don't like reading, it still is enjoyable and joyful. So I would those who haven't read it yet, I would like to challenge you, just like your bishops and your catechists probably have already challenged you to read this very important document on new evangelization. I will not talk about it. I'm fascinated with this document, and I have talked about it in many areas and in many places, but that is not my assignment today. I suppose that you already learned so much from it through the other conferences during these days. I would just like now to focus on the theme that has been given to me. You know, every one of us is called to evangelize a specific, we might say, context. Parents are primarily called to evangelize the families. They are called to be the first catechists, the first educators of their children. All office workers are called to sanctify their places of work and their daily work, as all of us are called. Bishops, priests, catechists, and lay leaders are called to map out, to find, and to inspire solutions so that all our evangelizers will continue to be enthusiastic, effective, and above all, convinced of that primary mission that the church has, and that is to evangelize. And I am a papal nuncio who happens to be the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. So you think that I could have that grandiose claim to evangelize the whole world through the United Nations? I couldn't make that claim, but in a sense, that is a rough description of my job assignment, we might say, of my ministry. I should say that it is my missionary mandate. It is a work that I do, that I have to convince myself every day that this is a pastoral ministry. Not everybody is called, not everybody is asked to do this job. And since I have been asked to do this job, I consider it as my personal calling. And in order to fulfill my mission to the community of nations, then I have to continually listen to the Holy Father, to continually analyze and understand what our Holy Father is telling the world, is telling the church. Because my primary mission is really kind of a trumpet, a kind of a springboard, a kind of a messenger. That's the definition anyway of an ambassador, of the Holy Father's message to the world that I have to translate through what we call statements, declarations, speeches that we do at the United Nations. Para mga trumpeta lang kami doon. That's our job. But before talking of specific themes that we are pursuing at the United Nations, as Holy See, as Catholic Church, I would like to talk on 2 points which I believe are fundamental if we have to hit the call of new evangelization. How to say it very simply. The first is also found in the Apostolic Exhortation of the Gospel, is that we must be convinced that the primary mission of all of us is evangelization. The Holy Father sets out the program for his papacy and evangelization in this document, The Joy of the Gospel. And he says that sharing the gospel, evangelizing, is the first, mark that word, and foremost task of the church. This is the greatest challenge and must be paradigmatic for all the church activity. So therefore, kahit man ginagawa natin, kahit man anong bukasyon sa buhay, all those things, all the differences of callings and ministries and work must be all within the general framework of evangelization, of witnessing, proclaiming the gospel. The Holy Father said, this is the church that I dream of. This is the church that I want. Because we believe that this is the church that Jesus wants. It is not therefore the work that we assign ourselves as church, but rather it is the work, it is the mandate that our Lord Jesus has given us. And we cannot change it. We don't want to change it either, because we are convinced that this is indeed the primary, foremost, and first mission that the Lord has given to us. The second point that I would like to mention is what Pope Francis calls the kairos of mercy. You know, kairos is one of those two Greek exotic terms that we use to indicate time. The other word is chronos. When we say chronos, that's really the time as seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, etc. That is why we have the word chronological, chronicle, etc. But kairos means also time. But it is not a measure of time, just like chronos, but rather it means it is an occasion. When you say it's the kairos, which means it's the fitting time. And that's what St. Paul calls also the plenitude of time. The fullest kairos, therefore, is the plenitude of time. The Holy Father said that we cannot evangelize if we don't have mercy and compassion. We might say, oh, yun nga ang theme ng bisita ng Santo Papa dito sa Pilipinas. Pero matagal na yun. 2 years and a half na. Tapos bago lang tayo nag-celebrate ng Year of Mercy. Sabi, tapos na yun. Iba na ngayon ang trend. Iba na naman ang inuusapan sa simbahan. Pero sabi ni Holy Father, mercy is at the core of the message of the gospel. And if there is no mercy, the Holy Father said, it is impossible for us to evangelize, especially for a church that is missionary, especially for a missionary church that is called to go out to the peripheries. That is again one of the key words of our Holy Father's teaching. Go out to the peripheries. And therefore, it means that we have to go out to people who are marginalized, people who are excluded in the life of society, whether it's economic or political, people who have not been going to church, people who have abandoned the church, people who think that the church is not for them because we in the church have not reached out to them. These are physical and above all existential peripheries. And if you want to reach out, go out to those peripheries, to the wounded in life, to those who have problems in life, difficulties in believing, difficulties in witnessing the faith, etc., then we must practice mercy. To make it a little bit shorter, I think I will just cite one of the Holy Father, the very day that he was elected, he made this the central theme of his papacy, mercy. And of course, that's also his motto, miserando atque eligendo, which is very difficult to translate. It's kind of saying, you know, the Lord, how would you say it, Your Eminence? The Lord, you know, the Lord has chosen me because he has given me mercy, or it is in mercifying me that the Lord has chosen me. Medyo mahirap na, pero that's the meaning. Ibig sabihin, that the choice, the vocation that the Lord has given him was given to him because the Lord looks upon him with mercy. Ganyan din. Di ba? I'm sure you have heard of this famous interview that the Holy Father gave to a Jesuit magazine called Chigota Católica, and was simultaneously published in 6 different languages, including American magazine. And I'm sure the seminary and the ecclesiastical faculties here, or any seminary worthy of the name, I wouldn't say that, should have. Yeah, because that carries so many good messages and teachings of our church. Now, the Holy Father was asked, how do you define yourself? Who is Jorge Bergoglio? Kung tayo yung tinanong, siguro sabihin kagad, I am Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. I was born in Cavite, Evidence. I am the son of so-and-so, and now I'm the Archbishop of Manila. The Holy Father did not respond in that very normal way. Instead, he responded in a surprising way. He said, I am a sinner. Nakakasya ka, no? Santo Papa pa, di ba? Santo, pagkatapos Papa, pagkatapos sabihin, oh, I am a sinner. Para hindi na santo. So nakakasya. But it's good. Because he said, I am a sinner. This is not a figure of speech. This is who I am. This is the definition that perfectly fits how I feel about myself and how I see myself. But the Holy Father did not stop there, defining himself a sinner. There is a second fundamental point to that. He said, yes, I am a sinner, but the Lord has looked upon me with mercy. So makasalanan tayong lahat, but we all receive the mercy of the Lord. But he didn't stop there either. There's still a third very important point, which is missionary. He said, I am a sinner, but the Lord has looked upon me with mercy, and now it is my turn to be a missionary of the Lord's mercy. And that is why the Holy Father said, we cannot be merciful if we have not experienced God's mercy. We could all be very proud, haughty, and really like the Pharisees, thinking that we are perfect or almost perfect, thinking that we don't need mercy, thinking that we don't need the mercy of others and above of God because we are perfect. We don't think even that we are sinners. And the Holy Father said, if you think that way and behave that way, hindi talaga kayo magiging effective evangelizers. Dapat pala maging evangelizers tayo, we have to be humble and we have to have an experience of God's mercy. Yan din ang importansya ng confession sa atin, because the sacrament of reconciliation really helps us develop and solidify in our hearts that feeling of God's mercy in our lives. So in those two very important points, I try to do my job, we might say, my ministry. It is very difficult because the community of nations, the United Nations, is a debating theater. Every country, every delegation has an opinion. And so you go there, you express our positions and all questions in the international community, and then you will find many opposition. Sometimes, many times, I hear people say that the United Nations has become just a talking shop. Do you remember that when the president was newly elected, this last year, he said, oh, the United Nations right now is just a club of people for them to get together, to talk and have a good time. And then the president added in his tweet, I don't want to give too much, let's say, tips, cues. Anyway, and he added, so sad. Well, if it is so sad, I think talking, coming together and enjoying our company of others is not a bad thing, right? So it's not very sad. But sometimes at the UN, it could be sad. You know, when, you know the songs, Longer Than, There Have Been Fishes in the Ocean. Di ba? Sino yun? Yung Longer by Dan Fogelberg. Fogelberg ba yun? Fogelberg. Kasi sa UN, sometimes speeches become so long. And the speeches at the UN could become longer than there have been fishes in the ocean. And then there have been stars up in the heavens. Diba? Sabi mo sa kanta. Sometimes they are not deep. Sometimes they are purely expressions of national interest. Sometimes you just don't find so much meaning behind policies. And that's why, as the song also said, they are not truer than any tree ever grew, or deeper than any forest primeval. Nevertheless, in spite of these limitations of the community of nations gathered together as United Nations, the Holy See, the Catholic Church, finds or believes that it is good that we should be there. I don't know if I have to convince you of that. You have your opinion. You know what the United Nations is all about. You know when it was founded, you know it was founded out of the ashes of the Second World War. So it is important. It succeeded, you know, many other organizations which failed. But at least the United Nations is still there. It might have defects, but we are there. I don't want to dwell longer on that, but I would just say that the Holy See has always been invited to talk of the United Nations, especially in big conferences since the very foundation of the United Nations. But we established our permanent mission to the United Nations in New York in a permanent manner only in 1964. And that is 19 years after the foundation of the United Nations in San Francisco, California in 1945. So we have been there permanently since 1964. You know, it is the biggest, you know, of all the multilateral organizations. I don't want to use very technical terms, they don't sound good. What just I mean multilateral, ibig sabihin doon, lahat ng maraming mga countries come together to form an organization. Here in Manila these days, you can see so many billboards saying ASEAN Summit 50. That's the ASEAN celebrates 50 years of life. ASEAN is a multilateral organization kasi marami mga countries na members yan dito sa Southeast Asia. There is also the European Union. That's also a multilateral organization. But there is nothing bigger than the United Nations. Because the United Nations is the organization in which all the 193 states or countries in the world are full members, and in which the Holy See is a permanent observer. That is, we are not a member, but we participate fully in the life of the United Nations. Somebody asked me, bakit permanent observer mission? Ano ibig sabihin? Nag-observe lang kayo? Nakikinig lang kayo? Ay, hindi, opposite. Lalo ako nagsasalita. Permanent observer, the Holy See is a permanent observer, is to distinguish the Holy See from what we call permanent members. So lahat ng 193 countries in the world have become permanent members of the United Nations. But the Holy See opted to remain an observer state. There are many differences, but I'll just give you two that you may be able to remember. The difference between the member states and the permanent observer state is that an observer state cannot vote unless otherwise decided by the member states. So kami, we participate in all the debates, in all negotiations. I deliver statements left and right, twice a month to the Security Council, to the General Assembly, to all the committees, etc., etc. Pero when the time comes to vote on those documents, then the Holy See does not vote. That was one of the prime considerations why we want to remain an observer state. Ayaw natin buboto. We want to remain politically neutral kasi most of the documents, resolutions, conventions being voted are primarily political. But it doesn't mean that we could not express, that we could not convey what we think about these questions because we could fully participate in the debate. The second prohibition, the second big difference is that the Holy See, as permanent observer state, cannot nominate people to the different positions in the United Nations. Halimbawa, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-nominate ng Secretary General, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-nominate ng President of the General Assembly, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-nominate ng, sabihin natin, yung head ng peacekeeping operations, etc. Dahil hindi tayo permanent member. So yung dalawa lang, I hope you can remember them. Hindi tayo bumoboto unless otherwise they decide that we should vote. And then the second is that hindi tayo nag-nominate ng mga tao. You know, I could not present His Eminence as a candidate to be Secretary General of the United Nations, although it could be good. Pero hindi tayo full member, so hindi ko magagawa yun. So I would just like now to focus on what issues that we really push, we have been pushing at the United Nations. You know, some people, especially in some countries like the United States, they think that Pope Francis, the Catholic Church in general, are doing some kind of politics because we make declarations, we make our positions clear on issues which are, we might say, political, which have very strong political implications. Let's say migration, let's say nuclear disarmament, let's say human trafficking, let's say climate change, or environment, I would like to call it our environment. Let's say development. Why should the Pope say something on those questions? And why should the Church, not only should, but must get involved and say something about these questions? Because we know very well that Jesus cares about these questions. Jesus cares about migrants. Jesus cares about people who are trafficked. Jesus cares about peace. Jesus cares about the victims of wars and conflicts. We should remember here what the pastoral constitution of the church in the modern world, that you know the name. What is the name of this document in the Second Vatican Council? Gaudium et Spes, no? The joys and the hopes. It says there at the very opening, which is really the key. I think all of us, as evangelizers, engage in many social issues like poverty, like development, should know that passage. You see, the joys and hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the hopes and joys. These are the joys and hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the followers of Christ. Indeed, nothing genuinely human fails to raise an echo in their hearts. This is really our guiding principle. Why we are active, why we must be active in the great debates of the great questions facing humanity, not only today, but in every moment in history. The first theme that, there are really, the United Nations is, it's a talking shop. And you can imagine any question, almost any question under the sun, and it's the UN is already there, or the UN is talking about it. But it doesn't mean the UN has always been there first, even before us. Can you imagine? In 1967, Paul VI, Blessed Paul VI, wrote a very beautiful letter on the importance of taking care of our environment. In the 1980s, I don't know exactly what, I don't know if it was 87, I think, or 83, the bishops of the Philippines, the CBCP wrote a very beautiful pastoral letter on the environment. What year was that? I think it was 1983. I was still a student at that time. You know, although I was a student almost all my life. But I know I was still in USD at that time. So that must have been before 85. Now, the question of the environment only became very big at the United Nations in the second part of the 80s into the 90s, and above all, with the Paris Agreement in 2015. So it doesn't mean that because the United Nations talk about them, nobody has been there before. We might even say, even almost so many things that the UN has been talking about, the Catholic Church has been there before. It's just in line with the Holy Father said. You think that you are a missionary. You think that you go to the peripheries in order to reach out to our less fortunate brothers and sisters. And you think that you're the first one to get there? No. Jesus is already there. And that's also how we see it there in the United Nations. When we talk about so much about human dignity now, I mean, how many times, for centuries that we have talked about it. And that is why it is really our primary mission as representing the Holy Father and representing the Church to bring all these experiences of our Church, all these moral principles of our Church into the international debate. Kaya, it is in the sense that all our positions, all our statements to the international community is really put in that framework. We want to contribute this experience of ours, these ideas of ours, these doctrines of ours into the big debates of the international community. So with that introduction, I would just like now to cite some, a priest in Italy, after he delivered a homily, the parishioners were complaining. They said, Father, ang haba ng homily ninyo, pwede ba next time medyo maiksi? Oh, sige. And then so the following Sunday, so he started his homily by saying, when God created Adam and Eve, so I said, oh my God, kailan kaya dadating tayo sa apocalypse dito? We are in the apocalypse now. The first and the biggest question, international question that we are really engaged in, because the Holy Father has told me explicitly, is to keep on talking about ending wars and conflicts. Napaka-importante yun sa international community. When Ban Ki-moon was about to leave, the Secretary General of the United Nations was about to leave the end of 2016, he said, when I was elected Secretary General, there were only 11 conflicts in the world. Now that I'm about to leave after 10 years, there are 39 wars in the world and 11 situations of intense tensions. And that means we could have 50 wars in different parts of the world. And that's why the Holy Father has kept on repeating this term, that we are in a third world war fought peacefully. Walang third world war in the sense that there is no general conflagration, but it's really, if you look at it, it's a third world war. Only that it's here and there. It's really more international than before, even. Because there has never been so many people displaced, forced to migrate forced to become refugees than ever before than now because of wars and conflicts. Wars and conflicts today is the biggest driver of forced migration, refugees, and a very, very fertile framework for human trafficking. Every study will tell you, every report of the United Nations will tell you that wars and conflicts have become the primary driver of the miseries of hundreds of millions of people. Look at Syria, look at South Sudan, look at Central African Republic, look at Northern Iraq, look at Yemen, where you have 17 million people dying of hunger. Look at South Sudan and Northern Nigeria, where there are 40 million people dying of hunger. These are the things that wars and conflicts bring upon peoples, bring upon entire nations. And not only that, wars and conflicts is the primary cause of extreme poverty. Because so much resources are poured into arms and less into development. And there can never be development without peace. That's also true that the church has been there before. Paul VI, again, one of the really greatest writers of the popes, I would say, beautiful, beautiful documents. In a document called Populorum Progressio, the progress of peoples, the development of peoples, he already said that development is the synonym of peace. And peace is the synonym of development. There can never be, now, if we read the most important document that the United Nations has ever come up, and that is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, this is a primary line. I think we should be proud of that. The United Nations has adopted what Paul VI already said in 1967, that there cannot be development without peace. And peace can only be sustained by development. We call that integral development. So that is how primary, that's how important we must talk about this thing at the United Nations. Twice a month, I deliver statements at the Security Council. And wherever there is a debate on ending wars and conflicts, peace building, peacekeeping missions, etc., the Holy Father always asks us to deliver his positions, to deliver his teachings. So don't forget that. War and conflict, it is so difficult. Why is it that the situations, in spite of all the talks, in spite of the Security Council meeting almost every day, that there has been no improvement? Again, the Holy Father said, the problem with us is that we talk about peace, we talk about finding solutions to wars, but on the other hand, we keep on selling arms. You know, 2 weeks ago, one big arms supplier, was very proud to announce, one country said, we just signed a contract to sell arms to Saudi Arabia for $11 billion. Yeah, what a great. And then a few weeks after that, or a week after that, another big arms dealer country said, we just concluded $13 billion with another country. And yet these are the countries where wars are going on. Who are doing the war in Yemen? And who are doing the war in Syria? And these are also the countries that sell arms. The Holy Father said, you have blood in your hands. Probably they listen, but they don't comment. But it is important. They might not listen, but you know that they hear it, and it's up to them if they really have some conscience to think about how much they are selling arms to terrorists. They are selling arms to armed rebels who are killing people. They are selling arms to client states, dictatorial regimes. So whatever development aid these same countries give is just a small fraction of what they profit from. And because it's only a small fraction, it can never end the tide of conflict. That's for sure. So my dear brothers and sisters, keep that in mind. Number one, we have to end wars and conflicts. The second is very allied to the first one, is the pursuit of disarmament. That's again a very big thing in the speeches of the Holy Father, even at the United Nations. We have to pursue this armament if we have to have sustainable development, if we have to have dignified life for all the peoples in the world. You know, just last July 7th, so that's 3 weeks ago, there was a very historic convention at the United Nations. And it's historic in the fact that I just told you that observer states don't vote, but in this particular convention, the United Nations General Assembly asked the Holy See to vote. We could not refuse the offer, although we don't want it, so on this convention, the Holy See voted. And this convention is entitled the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. There has never been a treaty like that. It sounds grandiose, and it is. It's such a huge question. But the fact is, all nuclear weapon states did not participate. So it's almost like a moral victory because people, countries who are going to sign this convention are all non-nuclear power states. But it is good in itself. We might say that there is another anvil, we might say, that we struck in history to realize what the prophet Isaiah says, that they will, what's that? They will turn their arms into plowshares and they will never go to war again. We just hope that this is a very important step forward. Who knows that in the future, in spite of the very explicit opposition of nuclear armed states, nuclear possessing states, especially in the United States, who knows that in the future this will take root even in those countries where there is nuclear weapon. And above all, it's very important that countries signing to this treaty will never try to get nuclear weapons for themselves. Somebody just, Father Jason just asked me here at the back, how worrisome, how problematic is North Korea? Have you ever thought of it? Kung magagalit sa inyo si, ang pangalan niya? Kim Jong-un, mamaya bubombahan kayo. Lalo na yung Manila kasi maraming tao. That is how dangerous it is. We might think, oh, mamaya mo na yan, parang bata yan. How could you not be concerned about really the devastating humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons? So that's the second priority that we have, the pursuit of disarmament. Disarmament of all types of arms. And the third point that I would like to emphasize is the third point that really we pursue very much, and we are very active because this is a year for migrants. Responding to the crisis of refugees, forced migrants, and migrants in general, and the internally displaced people across the globe. Do you know that there are 265 million people at this moment, probably more, because every day, every second, one or two is added. There are 265 million people crossing international borders today. 265 million. And more than 65 million of those are refugees. That means, by legal definition, by definition of the Convention on Refugees, these are people forced to flee their homes because of conflicts, because of persecutions, because of other forms of discrimination. Now, this is really one of the, we might say, leading policy statements, if we could call it that way, of Pope Francis. Do you still remember that the first trip of the Holy Father outside Rome was to visit people who were drowning in the Mediterranean, in an island called Lampedusa, which is the southernmost Italian island towards Libya, towards the south. The Holy Father went there because hundreds of people drown every week, every month. Thousands of people take refuge in those islands because they are fleeing wars, they are fleeing extreme poverty. So, in your own work of evangelization, how or what could you possibly do for migrants, for refugees, for displaced people? Advocacy certainly is one. Sabihin natin, wala tayong, anong gagawin natin? Ang layo natin. It's very important to get involved emotionally, even though those questions may be far. But kayo mga Pilipino, do you think that migration is not a defining problem in the Philippines? If you say it's not, then I don't know where you are. Siguro natutulog kayo the whole time. Sino sa atin? Which family doesn't have a migrant? And many of those migrants could be defined as forced migrants. They might be economic migrants, but it is not voluntary migration. It is a forced migration because of several factors. Forced migration is not only defined by wars and conflicts. Forced migration is defined also by extreme poverty, by economic want, and by that great desire for all parents and for all family members to make the lives of their loved ones better. So it must be a defining question for whoever is evangelizing. We cannot separate our evangelization from those concerns. So that's number 3. Migration, refugees, displaced persons. The 4th is very related to the 3rd. The 4th is with human trafficking, or in the United Nations language, it's called trafficking in persons. That is another defining policy of the Holy Father. The Holy Father is really considered the leading moral voice against trafficking in persons. And the Church certainly is a leading player when it comes to trying to stop human trafficking and to help victims of human trafficking. Yesterday, before the Mass, His Eminence and I were talking about this theme, because we have been everywhere. His Eminence is in Africa talking about human trafficking. I'm at the UN talking about human trafficking. When I'm in Rome, UN talking about human trafficking, His Eminence is in Hong Kong. That is a primary concern for the Church, because that is slavery. There has never been we might say, a more horrible practice of human slavery than it is now. There has never been as many people enslaved as there are now, as is now. It is estimated that there are 45 million people in the world being trafficked, even as we speak. Just imagine the extent of that. And if you look at the studies and the reports, United Nations, non-governmental organizations, etc., the number one reason why people are trafficked is sexual exploitation. And that is why, even though it's an increasing percentage, in 1914, according to the United Nations report, 71% of those who are trafficked are still women. And the children, the number of children being trafficked are also increasing for the same reason, sexual exploitation. And part of that conversation I had with His Eminence yesterday is the fact that the Philippines is again a leading country in this, in the negative sense. We have a very close relationship with the United Kingdom has established an office called the High Commission Against Modern Slavery. And the High Commissioner of that is very close to the Church, a very good friend of ours. His name is Kevin Highland. And he and His Eminence just had a conference in Abuja in Nigeria about human trafficking. And Commissioner Highland said, "Oh, do you know that one of the ways in which Filipinos are being trafficked now is in the fishing industry, especially after, what's the name of that? Yolanda, After Yolanda, so many fishermen lost their jobs, and they become so vulnerable to whatever kind of offer of any job they could get. So they have become so vulnerable to human trafficking by the fishing industry. If you visit some of the ships, instead, you can see Filipinos practically in cages. They are kept in cages and not paid, and they don't have documents, just like in many parts of the Middle East. Their passports are being confiscated, their contracts are not executed, even they're even asked to repay all the expenses for their travel. Many of our relatives are living such a difficult life. And just a few weeks ago, I attended a conference on human trafficking sponsored, among others, by New York Times. And it was so horrifying. Two of the speakers were from the Philippines. And a sister said that the latest case of human trafficking that they discovered was a video of a 10-month-old baby girl who was videoed by her own mother and sold across the internet. If we are not aware of these things, then we have to be aware, because these are the areas of peripheries that the Holy Father wants us to be present. So that's the fourth point, the fight against human trafficking. I would not elaborate further, because otherwise that would be another introduction. Now, the fifth point that I would like to really underline is what we call the fight against extreme poverty. Extreme poverty is officially now defined as living below $1.90. With that kind of definition, how many of our people here in Metro Manila, in the slum areas, are living in extreme poverty? Huge. Do you think that per capita, in total, they are earning around $2 a day? Every member of the family earning 100 pesos a day, so that they would live above extreme poverty. And even, of course, it's a very, very relative definition. 100 pesos a day per member of a family in a rural village is okay. That's 100 pesos in a place like Manila. How far do 100 pesos go? Nothing. You have to pay for everything. Anyway, extreme poverty is, for us, primarily a moral question. We cannot accept, and we shouldn't accept the fact that so many, it's defined at even around 1.2 billion people in the world, out of 7.2 billion people in the world, are living in extreme poverty. Because that is primarily a moral question, because it is an offense against human dignity. Within this big question of fight against poverty, of course, we put themes like development, like climate change, like the care of the environment, like financing for development, etc., etc. This is such a huge field in which all these important questions are inserted. But for us, fighting extreme poverty is above all and means fighting exclusion, fighting economic exclusion, fighting marginalization, so that these people, as the Holy Father said at the United Nations, when he visited the United Nations in 2015, let us make these people agents of their own development. Ibig sabihin nun, hindi lang tayo nag-hand-out sa mga pobre. Education, conscientization, raising awareness that they themselves could be the protagonists of their own development is very, very important. That is the most effective, the only effective way. You might give them 100 pesos every day so that they would not live in extreme poverty. But how long could you sustain that? So as evangelizers, this is a huge area for us, especially here in the Philippines. So that's the fifth. Let us fight extreme poverty. The sixth and the last, I promise this is the last because it's exactly 1 hour since I came up here, is our constant and fundamental priority of the defense and the promotion of life and the defense of marriage and family. This is the most challenging area of my work. You just get so many opposition when you talk against abortion, when you talk about the importance of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, when you talk about the family. You know, the UN, there has been a redefinition of family. They call it various types of families. You already know what it means. So I think with that 6 points, you have an idea of how our church, how our Holy Father is reaching out to the community of nations, trying to be present, trying to put out there in the debate very important fundamental principles of the way we understand people, the way we understand human beings, the way we understand moral life, etc. So my brothers and sisters, that is, our work, and that is, I call it, the Holy Father calls it diplomacy. I don't know if you believe him, but that is how we do our diplomacy. Diplomacy is for us, we have to convince ourselves that diplomacy is a ministry, that diplomacy is spiritual, that diplomacy is not contradictory to spirituality or the strive to make people more spiritual. When you say diplomacy, I'm sure that in your mind there are two things. First, you have the ability to lie for the interest of your country. Second, you enjoy caviar and champagne every evening. It's more or less true. But the heart, the core of the diplomacy is far from that. Diplomacy is primarily encounter, talk, negotiations in a friendly and civilized manner. And that's why we want to be there, because we believe that after all, our work is pastoral, our work is above all spiritual. And that is how the Holy Father wants his diplomats, wants his nuncios to act. We try hard. I hope we will not disappoint him. And I hope I have not disappointed you too much. Wake up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Auza. For enlightening us about the role of the church and the community of nations. We will now stand